our session on millennials, managing and working with millennials. I want to also welcome those of you who are from out of town to Southern California. I'm Ron Hasse. I'm the president and publisher of the Southern California News Group. So this is sort of my hometown. Whoa, that's a little loud. Okay, we good? Yes, I know, Michelle. You're a San Fernando Valley native, right? All right. I want to just tell a quick story before I introduce our today's panel and let you know a little bit of why I was asked to moderate this panel, because millennials in the workplace is an important priority of mine. We took an approach a few years ago to go after and hire some new innovative staff in our office, and of course we focused on the millennial age groups, knowing that they were the future of our organization. As the Southern California News Group was moving more towards a digital mindset in both our sales and our audience development, we knew we needed to get more people who had that innovative, intuitive technology to be able to come into our organization. In 2014, I believe, we hired a phenomenal staffer who we were able to pull away from another high-tech organization here in Silicon Beach. I don't know if you know that, but right here where you sit and in some of our West Side communities, we have what's called Silicon Beach, comparable to Silicon Valley. When we hired him, we were so thrilled to have him, and we knew that the work that he was going to do for us was going to be amazing. We put him in one of our offices. I walked away high-fiving a couple of our hiring managers and thought, fantastic, we got a great start and a great hire. It was about 6 weeks later, they told me he quit. And I was so disheartened that I went and met with him personally, not to try to talk him out of quitting, but to try to understand what caused him to end his tenure with us. And he shared with me that he liked our organization, that he liked the business that we were pursuing, but he found himself in a culture that was not adapting to him and his needs. We found that we put him in an office that was filled with, well, you and me. It was filled with people who didn't look like him, who didn't act like him, people who were not supportive of his innovative mindset. We didn't have a culture that was comforting and welcoming to him. He was surrounded by people who didn't even really agree with the direction of digital strategies for our organization, and they let him know that. So we also found that he was put into a facility that just looked like it had come out of the 1970s, was just not a good sign. So I realized that our efforts of creating innovation in our organization had to be more than just recruiting the millennial innovative workforce. We had to find a great way to retain them as well. So I started an innovation project at our organization and really looked at our operations from beginning to end to determine how we could improve the organizational culture. And we found that there are three things that we had to focus on, and I want you to think about these as you're listening to our panel today. The first thing is I had to look at myself individually and understand how my management style needed to be changed to make sure that I was open to the needs of the millennial workforce. I had to do some research and understand what qualities they were looking for in a business leader. Secondly, I had to look at how our organization itself needed to change. So think about that as you're listening to this. What are the things you as an individual can do differently? And secondly, what does your organization need to do to change? What are the issues that make innovative millennials want to leave or stay in your company? Think about the workforce. Think about the facilities that you have, the technology you provide, the compensation strategies you have in place. And then lastly, we had to think about our industry. We have less ability as a single company to change the industry, but we know that our industry, in meetings like this, we can raise these issues and form a more adaptable industry to the coming workforce of millennials. I have found that the stereotypes of millennials, which we all know and which Alec is going to debunk, are wrong. I have found them to be some of the most amazing employees in my organization who come in with a tremendous upside and outlook on life. They mix their life and their work together. One doesn't end or begin, and they're some of the most proactive, innovative employees that I have. So I'm really thrilled that we've begun that process of recognizing the importance of millennials in our workplace. And I hope that with today's panel, you all can come away with it, come away yourself with something you could do personally, something your company can do better, and then how we as an organization need to continue, as an industry I should say, need to continue to adapt. We have an outstanding panel for you today. We have an expert researcher and 2 industry millennials. And so what we're going to have a chance to do is find out if the research matches up to the reality. First of all, I want to introduce to you today's speaker. His name is Alec Levinson. He's an economist and a senior research scientist at the Center for Effective Organizations at the Marshall School of Business at USC. He's also the author of this book right here, What Millennials Want from Work. I've read through a few chapters of this. It's a great book. And you're going to find that today Alec is going to integrate you into the conversation. He wants to hear from you. He wants to talk a little bit about you and your perceptions. So the first person who asks a question is going to get this copy of his book. So there's your motivation to think now about that question for today's presentation. Our panelists today are Christina Campadonico. Did I do it right? All right. She's a Los Angeles-based arts and multimedia journalist for the Argonaut right here in Playa Vista, California. And we also have with us Austin Dave, who's the chief multimedia journalist and the director of digital operations at the Santa Clarita Signal, just north of us here in Mr. Champion's publication. Where'd Chuck go? He's right outside. He didn't want to hear what you had to say, Austin, apparently. There he is. And Russ is here too. We were just introducing your employee. Well, we're all going to be one day, aren't we? All right, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Alec Levinson, our speaker, and I will be in the field taking questions with this microphone. So without further ado, Alec, it's all yours.
Thank you, Ron. And Ron was not supposed to tell you I was going to debunk myths. I was going to tell you that I'm actually here to talk about fake news. And we're going to prove some fake news today. That's it for my political comment for the morning. I don't have a lot of time, but just want to say by way of introduction that I, in the group that I'm part of at USC, I'm not a regular professor. I actually spend all my time out working with companies like yours, a lot of big multinational companies, on helping them to understand what are the issues that they're facing with their people, all the way from organization design down through employee engagement. And this is based on work that I did with a colleague of mine from the Center for Creative Leadership, Jennifer Deal, where we looked at, give me the details here. Sorry, I'll go back. I got some stats on what the research looked like in a slide or two. But what I want to emphasize is that part of the reason why we engaged in this topic is because we did see a lot of, let's not call it fake news, but let's say exaggerated comments based on small bits of data. And both of us have made a little bit of our careers around helping to set the record straight in terms of what's really going on or not. So I view this, one way I talk about this is our effort to take a 2-dimensional representation of an entire generation and make it a little more 3-dimensional. Okay. Couple of things to note as we get into this. So I'm going to act like a little pointy-headed academic for about a minute and a half now, and then I'll go back to being a normal person. Okay. Pointy-headed academic says most of what we call generational differences are actually career stage differences. Okay? So that as people graduate school and they go to work, there's a natural kind of evolution they go through in terms of taking on a job, figuring out how the world works. I don't know about you guys, but I felt like my undergraduate degree totally prepared me for my first job out of graduate school, right? Okay, I mean, you guys feel that way too, right? See? That's why you have them up here. Okay. This is a lot of what we do when particularly we as the older people, and I guess I'm probably about middle and looking around here. I'll put myself in the older category. I'm actually late Generation X. For those of us, and my daughter's 17, so for those of us who've been in the working world for a little while, part of what happens is we tend to forget what life was like when we entered the labor market and look back through rose-colored glasses. So a lot of what we call generational differences actually are life stage differences. So you graduate school, you're not tied down. Eventually, you start to put down roots. You can get a spouse, get a house, and you also become much more tied into the work that you're doing, which makes you much more valuable to the company you're working for, but also makes you more beholden to them as well. So it becomes more of a mutual you're in it together, both you and the company. Now, there are real differences across generations. They have a lot to do with the economic conditions that are like when you leave school. I don't know about where each of you were when you left school, but if you think about the stereotypes about the baby boomers, the baby boom was supposed to be this carefree generation that graduated into a booming labor market in the 1960s, and that helped to shape their view of the world. Well, the late baby boomers graduated school in the early 70s, right in the middle of the oil price shock. And they had a very different view of the world. It is actually true that people who graduate in a recession tend to do worse for their entire careers on average compared to people who graduate when times are going well. So it really can have this lasting impact. Doesn't mean everybody, but on average that's true. Of course, we know all about technology differences. Every new generation is more adept at using technology, and those are real differences. There also are differences in terms of expectations for careers and what people want out of the job. The millennial generation is the first generation that has grown up with us telling them that there is no loyalty. We had the baby boom who was told that if you go to work for a company and you give everything to that company, you'll be rewarded in the long run. You will have a job in the long run. For Generation X, that was when that compact was broken, but they still had that illusion. But the millennials are the first generation that we've actually raised saying, you only can trust yourselves. Don't trust a company. So if that then causes them to question the kinds of things that we ask them to do, the best place to look is the mirror, not necessarily point fingers, point blame. And then finally, there are real differences in terms of financial insecurity, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. Okay, so just to set the record straight in terms of the millennials, when I say millennials, we're talking about the 20-year age range of people who were born between 1980 and 2000. That means the oldest millennials are, sorry, the slides, I didn't update the slide. The oldest millennials are now actually 17 to 37 years old. My daughter is November 99, so she just made it in. She's amongst the youngest millennials. And it is the case in many of the organizations that we look at and that we work with that right now, millennials are actually starting to run lots of organizations, at least in the lower management ranks. And you have some firms like professional services firms where they're very heavy in terms of people who are younger. So you look at like the accounting firms, you look at some law firms, and you have it now where you have people where first of all they are a majority millennial firm, and on top of it, you're actually getting people who are partners already who are millennials. There we go. Okay, so what did we do? Like I said, we wanted to go and debunk some of the myths, and we are both social scientists, so we decided to go and get data. We got lots of data. We did interviews with people in countries all over the world. We did surveys with over 25,000 millennials, over 29,000 older workers, mostly Generation X, and in 22 countries around the world. Now, bottom line is that I'm not going to talk about differences across countries, but what we largely found is that what I'm going to tell you, you might think of as a story about the US, is actually consistent across the whole world. And I'm not going to get too much into it, but in case you're wondering, in some cases, we actually able to look at millennials and Generation X working side by side in the exact same job, and so we could actually test for real generational differences. That's the last of my public service announcements as a social scientist. All right, now, this is the book. So it's basically 5 chapters, and these are the contrasts that we're going to talk about. So if you get all this, you don't have to read the book. Of course, you're welcome to. But I don't make a lot of money off of it, so, you know. Okay, question for you. Are millennials entitled?
Yes,
Yes. Why?
because of hover parents like me.
Hover parents like you. I'm not like you at all. I'm not a helicopter parent at all.
I get my version of my drive to some extent, but and I think that I grew up in an age where my parents struggled financially, their parents struggled even harder. So I feel, I don't know if it's right, wrong, or whatever, that if I have, I'm going to help my kids get as good a kick start as they can. So
Okay.
my kids are entitled. I don't know about other kids.
Your kids are special. Everyone else's kids are entitled.
Is part of this, does it revolve around sports? Like, what I see now is that when I grew up, you're either a team is winning, you're winning. Now it's like everybody gets a trophy. You come in last, oh, you guys, there's like something missing there. Now maybe that's a good thing that everybody plays, and and everybody gets a chance. But now there's no. Do you know what I mean? It's like everybody.
Yes.
wins. Everybody gets a trophy. You came in last year the worst. And
You get awards for participating, for just showing up.
yeah, and I'm not sure that that's right, because it goes into the workforce too. That you get rewarded even though you're not a hard worker, or you should get rewarded. Everybody gets raised. So there's something missing, I think, in that piece.
Okay.
I'm the lucky father of 6 daughters, a single father of 6 daughters. And my observation is this: we catch our kids before they fall. We don't allow them to deal with the things that a lot of the people in this room have had to deal with as they've grown up, and to struggle through and learn the skill sets that are necessary to move to that next level. They figure it out, at least I believe they figure it out, but potentially later in life, as you suggest, as career changes, as they take on more responsibilities and life hits them in the face, and they realize that they can't just get a participation trophy or get out of trouble because mom and dad show up to save them.
Yeah. So this is the first era when you could actually have I don't know if it's a best-selling book, but how many people here have actually had to read or took a look at the book, I think it's like The Beauty of a Skinned Knee or something. This book was written for parents to remind them you actually have to let your kids fail. Okay? And the fact that people have to write books like this is kind of sad. Are millennials entitled?
They can be. I think in some cases they don't understand what the value of something is. In some cases you may have an affluent neighborhood where the child may not have to work for that car, or it wasn't given to them because they graduated from high school. Here you go, congratulations, here's your car. They're getting cars because now it's become a right. It's become a right to have a car at 16. A sports car at that. And in some cases, they don't understand that mom and dad had to work for that car because they did. It's not free. They don't understand the value of it because they didn't have to work for it. And so you're seeing these little things like participation awards, you're seeing these things that are coming up that they don't understand the value of it. And I don't know if it's because we're not instilling it or it's becoming a change of, I want to provide for my child what I didn't have. At what point do you say to yourself, okay, I want to provide them this car that I had to work for. I don't want them to have to go through that, but that's a great thing, yes, and we're really appreciative of that, but at the same time, what are we losing because of that? We're losing the value. We're losing the understanding of appreciation. We're losing the ability to really see something and understand, oh, this is how this works. Social media, we have Google and stuff nowadays. We don't have to go into a library and research something and pick up a library book. Things are becoming easier, but we're losing that appreciation for how did this get to this point.
Okay, now notice that was a millennial talking about those other millennials, because of course it doesn't apply to him. Okay, so just for fun, can you read this? Okay, so this is supposed to be what the millennials are like. However, this is what the data say. Okay. If you call entitled that they want a life outside of work, then they are entitled. But the reality is that they actually are really willing to work long and hard hours. We found that people are just as dedicated in the millennial generation as they are in the older generations. Now, remember the life stage differences. When people leave school, they get a cold, hard slap across the face to find out what it means to actually work a real job. But that's been true for every single generation when they enter the workforce. Okay? So don't confuse that transition period with their actual dedication to work. They've also been called entitled because they're willing to challenge authority. Okay? There's only call people by their first names, no lack of respect, certainly no lack of respect for organizational hierarchy, right? I mean, willing to walk into the CEO's office and just say whatever they want. That's actually a good thing. I don't know about you guys, but in the work that I do and my colleagues do at the Center for Effective Organizations, there's this long line of research and practice that shows that the more you can involve people in decision-making in the organization, the more you can take decision-making and push it down to the front lines where it needs to be, you actually get better outcomes. You get better work, you get better contributions. So the flip side of this is I actually want somebody who's willing to speak their mind, but it just has to be done respectfully. And that's also a little bit of an age thing. People have to learn how to moderate themselves. So there are some differences there, but we view it as a positive. Now, a key thing is you will find people pushing back against boring, repetitive work. Now, we all have to put our dues in, right? But putting your dues in is not the same thing as hazing. Just because it might have been difficult when you were young, just because you might have had to deal with a difficult boss, doesn't give you the right to not use somebody's time effectively. We see this a lot in terms of the demands for face time. Okay? So you can't be productive unless I see you face to face. Now in your business is a little bit different because if your people aren't out there actually collecting the news and being outside of the newsroom, then they're not doing their job. But that's the basic principle, is that you need to get away from thinking about having somebody prove that they are doing the right job because you see them in front of you versus actually focusing on what they're doing for you. All right, are they needy? So I knew you were going to be here, so I put this cartoon in for you.
Are they needy? I don't know. I feel like both my kids and although, like I said earlier, that I do support them to somewhat financially, my husband and I, in terms of neediness, they really do rebel when I try to provide an opinion, or even if they ask me for something, they kind of don't really want my opinion. They just want to bounce the idea off. So I would say, I mean, I'm only speaking from firsthand experience with my kids. I don't feel like they're that needy. They get stuff from us, and they accept it graciously. Now, I was just saying to Barb, I wonder if all this stuff was taken away, what would happen then, to his point? You know, is there that, then would the neediness begin? But right now, not so much. So,
has anybody, I mean, have you ever heard these stories about, like, you know, parents showing up at work? Have you experienced this at all? Okay, so we heard some stories about this. There are people who really claim that this generation wants this. Okay, Christina, do you want your parents showing up at work and helping you figure out your job?
No, not at all. As a journalist, I'm a very independent worker, and the field sort of lends itself to that. You know, you have to go out, report, have FaceTime with people, do interviews, make phone calls, and really not have a ton of supervision. And so I sort of like how my editor and my newspaper and my job trust me, you know, with my judgment and my writing abilities and my abilities to report. So I think I don't need a ton of supervision, but I do like support, I do like feedback. And so the things I need are more selective than like, I constantly need your attention. It's more like critique and feedback that I appreciate the most, and mentorship as well.
So, and what kind of social media do you do? Do you like Instagram? Do you do?
Instagram's my favorite, but I use Facebook, Twitter, and starting to use Snapchat. Snapchat still mystifies me, even though I'm a quote-unquote millennial.
Well, but that's because Snapchat's for the young people.
It's for the younger people,
It
yeah.
is for you, yeah. Yeah, so this is another one of the stereotypes, which is, so because we get this instant gratification from how many likes we get when you do your Instagram, or how many people are friending you on Facebook, that the myth is that the millennials want the same thing. That makes them needy. But that's not really the case, okay? They do want mentoring, coaching, and support, like Christina just said. She didn't even see the slide. She knew I was going to say that. But they're also independent. So they don't want to be micromanaged. They want to be coached. They want to be able to have control over what they're doing. Now, this can be fighting words for many managers. We are not talking about taking the keys to the kingdom and turning them over to the inmates. Okay? When people say they want control over their work, they understand their limits. Okay? There actually are best practices for how we do the work. There are processes we have to follow. But the mistake is when we then say, you then put people in handcuffs, and you say there's one way to do this and you have to do it that way. That's exactly when you're going to turn them off, or you're going to send them out the door, like Ron was talking about. Okay? If he had done a better job of setting it up so that that new millennial actually felt that he was going to be able to contribute in a way that was meaningful, he might have been able, better chance he would have kept him. Feedback. So there's this myth about constant feedback. You need to have it instantaneously. And the bottom line is that yes, they want feedback, but unlike the cartoon that I put up there, we found that nobody wants millennials' parents involved in their work, except for those handful of helicopter parents who think it's their right. But I know you aren't doing that with your kids. Okay. One of the most important things is appreciation. Now, appreciation is not, I go walking by Austin's desk and I say, attaboy, and I go, keep on going. A lot of times we in management roles think that we are making people feel appreciated when we say you did a good job. But appreciation is not determined by the person who's speaking the words. It's determined by the person who's receiving them. How often do you actually take the time to make sure that what you're trying to express is actually heard that way? That the people who are working for you actually truly feel appreciated. This is one of the more, I don't know if dangerous is the word for it. This is one of the more cutting things that we look at, because we talk a lot about communication, we talk a lot about feedback, but we don't talk a lot about listening. And this means you have to listen. Back. Okay. So, do millennials want to change the world? Okay, how? How do you want to change the world?
Well, I think that being a part of the media, I think that this applies to just, I guess, millennials that are part of the media. You have that power to not influence, but to really take a look at things and present a case, almost. Present the facts, show them what is going on, what's happening, and let them make that determination themselves. For millennials, I believe that they always want to, there's a cause. There's always a cause at the center of something that they're doing, whether it's a cause for themselves or a cause for someone else. You know, they walk by a homeless person on the street and they say, you know what, I want to do something, you know, I want to volunteer. I want to do something at a food pantry. I want to do something, you know. Or in most cases, you see on social media that viral video of someone giving a homeless person $100, and it inspires more people to do that. Usually that's a millennial that's shooting that video because they just want to shoot video of everything, including themselves. But in some cases, they do shoot something that has to do with contributing to society, to a cause. I know for me, you know, we just finished we're working in the middle of a series on drugs and how it's impacting youth. And we're hoping that, you know, with this series, it opens up the dialogue to talk about it, to make it okay to talk about an issue. It doesn't have to be drugs. It could be, you know, driving and speeding. It could be studying in school. It could be your friends and addiction to social media. It could be a number of things. But I know that for me personally, there's always a cause at the center of everything I do. And it usually has something to do with contributing to society.
Yeah. And just to piggyback off of that, a lot of my friends, we often talk about what motivates us in our careers and personally, and often those two things are intertwined. So being an arts journalist, for instance, I'm very passionate about everything arts and culture that's happening in Los Angeles, especially the West Side, and how those communities are impacted. And so that sort of shapes every part of my professional life and my social media too. You know, millennials are very conscious about personal branding, and that extends from their Facebook accounts to their LinkedIn accounts, and showing that everything you do professionally as well as maybe extracurricularly or volunteer-wise, it all kind of dovetails together into that same interest or passion. And most millennials I know want to work in a specific field because they have an interest in film or the arts or theater or dance, etc. And so all their energies, especially in the early stages of their career, seem to go towards those endeavors. And that's how they want to make change, is by pursuing these interests.
So, having said that, it is absolutely true that the millennials want to contribute to society, as our wonderful guests have shown. But you can't use that as an excuse for cutting back on what they need financially, what they need in their careers. There's no such thing as a free lunch where you can hire somebody who's a millennial and say, oh, I can save some money because if we allow them to do good for the world, then they don't need to have as much for themselves. Could not be farther from the truth. So, and this is where financial issues are a huge concern. We're talking about a generation that is growing up in the aftermath of the worst economic recession that we've had in 3 generations, well, 2 generations. And we are talking as well about people who are taking on enormous amounts of debt. So, anybody know what the statistics are on young people living at home after they leave school? What? 50%. Yeah, and historically, are we high, low? High, really high, like historical high. And this is because this generation loves to live with their parents, right? I mean, they just get out of school and they, oh, that was really great, but now I want to go back home and live with mom and dad, because that's what I've been looking forward to. Of course not. It's because it's too expensive. Student debt, housing, it's a big deal. And these financial pressures they are really huge. Which unfortunately leads to situations like this. This is not a joke. The number of people who are retiring with student debt is at an all-time high, and it will keep on going up every single year for each new cohort for probably the next 30 years, because it hasn't stopped increasing. I'm an economist, although I've been spending the past 18 years working in the field of organization behavior. Those of you who know psychology, thank you for letting me come over and work on the bright side. I'm trying to leave as much of the dismal science behind me. Economists have done a great thing by helping to point out that people who get a college education do better financially. But a college education, whatever the cost, is where people are right now, and we could not have failed society more by saying that, or at least by allowing that to be said. If I can have any impact on any young person's life, particularly when they're making choices about college, I will look at them and I will say, one of the most important things you need to think about is leaving school with as little debt as possible. Going to the best school and coming out with $100,000 of debt is not a good idea unless you know you're going to be a thoracic surgeon. Even then, with healthcare changing today, who knows? But it's a big deal, and it's one that we as a society, and you guys in your industry, we need to start telling a different story. So, Are millennials obsessed with technology? Okay, yes, of course they are. Okay, so what's your preferred way that you communicate with your friends? Or like do you do it? Are you guys like to get together in person? Do you like to do social media? Do you?
Usually we text or use Facebook Messenger to communicate, but usually it's to arrange a get-together. We do like FaceTime. We like getting together for dinner with our friends. I do. And so the texting and the messaging, it's all a vehicle to maybe actually like setting up some in-person human FaceTime. So maybe that's a bit of a misconception that we're just sort of like addicted to technology. It's just an easy way to coordinate things. I think we'll always use our phones and our tablets to facilitate, in real life experiences.
I do like technology and I don't. My phone is currently in my pocket and it's off. This is the first time it's been off in probably a couple of months. Yeah, no, I'm serious. It's probably been that long. But that's because generally I deal a lot with, I'm trained in broadcast journalism, ideally, and so there are times where there's a news story that comes up, or there is someone trying to get in contact with me. And so constantly I'm on the phone. I think that in most cases I'm too connected. When I get home, I take off my smartwatch, I take out my phone, iPad, laptop, everything. Everything goes somewhere away from me because there are times where you need to decompress, you need to unwind. But I know there are times during the day where we're so connected now with social media, with the phones that are constantly connected. If you go back 10 years ago, your phone, the internet was super slow, and doing a Google search, it would take a couple minutes. But now, if you wanted to know something, it's at it's at your fingertips. You have the whole world, and sometimes that's a good thing, it's a bad thing. But I know that a lot of the problems that we're seeing, I'm talking to a lot of experts, with learning about drugs and addiction now. They're saying that most children are waking up with their phones. They're going to sleep with their phones. They have their friends. They have their social media. Their friends never leave, and they have that. I was talking to a counselor, and he said that children are having a problem with attachment and detachment. They're attaching to their friends and detaching from their family. They're detaching from the things that matter to them the most, or that should matter to them the most, at least. And for me, I saw a lot of that coming in, attaching to my phone and my friends and the social media and whatnot, and detaching from my family and loved ones. And so I think we're obsessed with technology just because we've grown up with it. I mean, I grew up in a transitional period where we had libraries, we learned the Dewey Decimal System and whatnot, but I don't know if they're still teaching that because, libraries are needed. I like going to a library and picking up a physical book. But at the same time, I could save, an hour or so with my phone, pull it out, I have the answer right there. But I'd say we are obsessed, but will we be more obsessed in the future? Maybe. But I think it's important that we learn how to work without technology and how to work with it.
We like our downtime. We like disconnecting. There are times when I put away my phone, especially if I'm writing, like I put away my phone, I hide it, I turn it on silent. So, and that's one way we can achieve work-life balance since we are connected so now. So being able to put away the phone becomes an important part of work-life balance, I think, for a lot of people our age.
So let me ask, how many people here currently do not have a smartphone on them, like an old flip phone? Okay. This is the reality for all of us now. Okay? We're all tethered. Well, by the way, I congratulate you, because it means you're not constantly on the way the rest of us are.
Because I'm 86 years old.
I know quite a few 86-year-olds who also use smartphones, so we can have a conversation later. I can help you if you'd like. We have a couple of young people up here that can help you learn a smartphone if you'd like, and probably some of your colleagues as well. So this is an issue for all of us. It's actually not a generational difference. In the work that we do with companies, one of the things I like to emphasize is that if you see a new generation using technology that you're not familiar with, the question you have to ask yourself is, how important is that technology for the business that we're doing? When digitization happened, the entire media industry transformed almost overnight, often to the detriment of your business models. Okay? That was not a statement about the new generation. That was everybody. If only the new generation was using technology, then your business models wouldn't change so quickly. It's when everybody started changing. It's the same kind of thing when we think about how we interact with people. So everyone's on social media. Does that mean we have to manage using social media? It depends. If it enables us to engage with our employees better, sure. But if not, then some of the old-fashioned ways that we interact are just as good. In particular, one of the things that we found, I'll just let you kind of read this, I won't talk through all of them. So when we ask people what kinds of media did they use for interacting with their friends, we found absolutely, just like our two millennials here, that the younger generation was much more likely to use social media for interacting with friends. Now, having said that, for those of us who are older in this room, we're just as guilty. But rather than using social media, we overuse email. Okay? So the rate of using technology to communicate is actually about the same across the older generation and millennials. It's just that we're much more heavily weighted on email, and they're more heavily weighted on the other technologies. And we can't even see eye to eye. So they say, why are you doing so much email? And we say, why are you doing so much texting? Well, it's just a new way of communicating. When my daughter was about 14 years old, we were driving somewhere. She was sitting in the back of the car, and she had her head in her phone, of course. And then she gets up, and she just sits up and says, you know, when I have a kid, I bet I'll be saying to them, why don't you just text? Because we would always say to her, why are you having these entire conversations over text and not picking up the phone and calling? And that was her realization that whatever was going to happen in the next generation, she was going to have the same experience with her kid of saying the world has changed radically and people aren't communicating the same. But at the end of the day, it's about making the connection however you can. Now, what we found is that even though there are those differences in terms of how people communicate with their friends, when it comes to critical conversations at work, all bets are off. How many people here would like to have a difficult conversation with their manager about their performance over texting? You don't? Really? 90% of people in all generations want to have all those critical conversations in face-to-face about their performance, about their careers, about things that are critical about their lives at work. Now, the fact that we had 9% of people say that they were willing to hear about their performance and their compensation through electronic means, I have one interpretation of that data point, which is those 9% think that they walk on water. They don't think they're going to get bad news, so they say, of course you can text it to me. But if they knew it was going to be bad news, then they'd say, well, hell no, I need to go in there and argue for this. So there's a big difference between how people act in their social lives versus what they want at work. Is loyalty dead? I kind of already gave this one away, but. This is the reality that we have today, is that people are absolutely committed to their organizations, but they're not loyal, because loyalty was you trusted the company to do whatever they wanted to you. And instead, we talk much more about commitment. Commitment is a two-way street. If you give people the right opportunities, if you give them the ability to be able to grow, if you reward them appropriately, then they will stay and want to work for you, and they will be committed to you. But the minute that you do something different, then they'll walk out the door. Does this sound like the way you guys feel?
I find that Well, for me personally, when I entered the workforce in 2013, having graduated from college, I had struggled a lot to get my first job. Ended up going back to graduate school and doing a year of graduate school. And then after that, got my first job, actually at the Argonaut, my first reporting job. And that struggle of, just applying for jobs, it made me realize that I have to think of my career as like being a one-woman business, and planning out like what's going to be best for my career. That's not to say that I'm ungrateful for the opportunities that I've been given. I think it actually makes me work harder at my current workplace, having struggled so much to get that first job. But I think it comes down, I think just the mindset is different. With millennials, thinking more about how they can maximize their career, thinking of themselves just as a business like any other entity. And what are you going to do that's best for your business? And that might be 2 or 3 years at one institution, and then a new opportunity comes up. It's just like a business move. You move somewhere else to just see where your career is going to grow. So I think just the mindset's a little different.
And I think I'm seeing a lot of, I also do a little bit of teaching at the community college for broadcast journalism. And what I'm noticing between them and myself is it's that mixture between personal branding and seeking that cause. If you feel like you are yourself, that one-person business model, you also have to mix in that cause. If you feel like you're making a difference, you're more likely to stay. If you feel like you are, you coming in today, you coming in that extra hour early is going to make a bigger difference, not only for yourself, but for the corporation or organization you work for, and then in turn, the people that they serve, then you're going to come in 2 hours early, 3 hours early. You'll come in, you'll stay late. It's one of those things where you're committed if you feel like your company is committed to you. If they're committed to what you either have to say, or even if you are completely wrong and they say, hey, here's a better way of doing this. This is for your personal growth. This is because we want to see you succeed. That's great. I work for an organization where that's what it's built on. It's built on the business side of the things, that comes later, but all of us are people. We're all humans. We all are here as humans. You can't look at me like the digital director or the multimedia journalist. You have to see me for a human first. Once you take care of that, everything else somewhat takes care of itself. You take care of the fact that I'm here to make a difference for you and your company, which will make a difference for the people you serve. If you look at it that way somewhat, I think you'll find more success. I know for me personally that works the best way.
Yeah, so the biggest problem we have in organizations is that we, back in the old days, back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, we had this trade-off that you were overworked and underpaid when you were young, but then you were rewarded by having cushier and relatively overpaid jobs when you're older. But in the effort to be as productive as possible and to maximize margins and profits, companies attack the top end of that pretty successfully. If you are an older worker and you are not putting in everything the company needs, then they will cut you. Companies have done a pretty good job of that. It's one of the reasons why we have big issues about long-term unemployment for people who are older. But the other part of that hasn't been solved. We're going to overwork you and underpay you while you're young is still the ethos. And that's the problem. Because if you're not giving people the opportunities right now to succeed, if they don't see value from what they're doing right now, and they don't see the opportunities in terms of professional growth and their career development, then they will be much more likely to leave. That does make them less loyal, but it also makes them much, much smarter. We're not advancing. Okay, so bottom line is, just to summarize, you want to focus on 3 things, okay? And it comes down to it's the people, the work, and the opportunities, okay? Everybody, millennials as well as older workers, want to be working within an organization where they feel like they are part of a community, where they have good relationships with their boss, with the people they're working with. The work itself needs to be interesting and meaningful and balanced. So a lot more and more now we talk about work-life integration as opposed to work-life balance, because of course we're all working way too much to be balanced. But however it is that you get that balance, that's what people need. And then finally, people want the opportunity to be able to contribute and to grow and to be able to be rewarded. That's it.
Wow, fantastic. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you, Alec. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Austin. That was a fantastic discussion. I think one of the best presentations we've seen at CNPA in a while, and I really appreciate you coming and sharing your insights with us, all three of you. I have a funny story. I was thinking about our friends who still have the flip phones. My mom and dad are both in their late 80s, and a couple of years ago, I decided that it was time to get them connected to smartphones. They were so afraid of their phone, of ever using it, because they thought they were going to get charged for it. So I took them to the Apple store, bought them both an iPhone, and then we had the fun experience of going to dinner afterwards. My wife and I took my parents out for dinner, and it was that role reversal where we're trying to talk to them, and they were doing this the whole time. My mom and dad buried in their iPhone, so I had to also teach them about how not to do that at dinner. The book that Alec wrote in his introduction has 2 points that I just want to reiterate for you. It says, number 1, millennials want to be happy and effective at work. And number 2, you can provide an environment where millennials can be both happy and effective without ruining your organization if you focus on what actually is important to them. And I think that's really important, because the takeaway for me is that the millennial generation coming into our workforce is going to happen whether we want it to or not, and I want to. I think they're phenomenal, talented, innovative young people. Certainly there are good and bad that comes with that, just like it did in each of our generations. But the change that needs to happen in our organizations and in our industry is with us, not with them. We need to be adaptable. We need to be thinking about how to change our management styles, how to change our organizational structures, and how to change the industry stereotypes to make sure that we are welcoming the new generation of thought leaders into the media industry. So I just want to thank you again, Alec. Thank you, Austin and Christina, for your great help today on this panel. We're going to break now for lunch, which will be served as a buffet in the lobby. Then you'll want to come back in here. And in about 45 minutes, we're going to be setting up for our next presentation, Journalism in the Trump Era, with some of our thought leaders from the Los Angeles Times, Southern California News Group. So thank you very much for your time today.